I'm really glad to have you here with us. We're going to talk about emotional connection. I think this is especially important if you are struggling with arguments that you can't repair, or you're just not seeing eye to eye and you can't figure out why you're on opposite teams, or maybe you're really distant from each other. You just don't have that close feeling anymore. You're not talking about anything meaningful. What I found is that these issues are usually very easily solved by rebuilding emotional connection. Most of the time we get sidetracked with communication. Couples counseling starts with that usually right away. But what I find is that you really need to have the emotional connection built first before any of that can work. So today we're going to talk about what emotional connection really is, because I think a lot of people get this wrong and it's not what most people think. And we're going to talk about the specific ways that emotional disconnection impacts relationships, why it has to come before communication, especially when it comes to ongoing disagreements and conflict. And then we're going to get into 6 practical solutions to rebuild emotional connection, even when it feels like the walls are up. So what is emotional connection? Now, some of you who know the definition, you've probably heard this before, but ultimately what it means is that it's not just listening to somebody's emotions. It's not emoting. It's not expressing emotions. It's not being emotional. Really what it is it's having a sense of deep knowing about the other person and feeling known by the other person. Dr. Sue Johnson, she's an author and she brought attachment theory back into modern psychology. This was like really old research and she brought it into the forefront of couples work and relationships. And she talks about emotional connection stemming from primal safety, right? Biologically knowing that your partner or the person that you're most attached to is there for you in times of need. Emotional connection is about trust and it's about vulnerability and mutual understanding. So when you have emotional connection, you're operating from the assumption that you trust your partner, that if you are in distress, you know that they're going to turn toward you. You turn toward them in distress, they turn toward you as well. They don't turn away or ignore you. You are operating from the assumption that you're seen, that you're heard, and that you're really valued without any fear of judgment. And you also are operating from the assumption that you're on the same team and you're working through life's challenges together, even if you have difference of opinion. So the safety is because of the connection. Emotional connection is what creates safety. And when I talk about safety, what I'm talking about is attunement, right? Your partner, they know where you're at, they can feel it, they're observing you, they're tuned into you, they're noticing changes in energy, they're noticing changes. Just like if, you are struggling with something and they ask you what's wrong, you feel like they're tuned into you, right? They're expressing curiosity because they're noticing you. And emotional disconnection would be you don't even say anything. You might notice that something's off, but you're not asking. So that would be an example. But I think the reason why this is so important to recognize that it is about safety is because it's primal and it's biological. Whereas communication is more cerebral. We're using language. We're using the frontal lobe of our brain. Our thinking brain has to be activated in order to communicate. Whereas emotional connection can be conveyed prelingually. It can be conveyed without language. In fact, you can't even access language or the communication tools that you really need when you're activated because you're in emotional disconnection. And if you think about it, since birth and as babies, having a secure attachment to your caregiver, it's biologically required for your survival, right? You're going to die if they're not tuned into what you need, and they can anticipate how to keep you safe. Now, obviously, in adult relationships, we're not babies, but there's still that biological wiring in the way that our brain works, that when we know that the people that are closest to us are attuned to us and are aware of us and what we need, or at least care, right? That feels really safe to us. And as adults, having secure attachments with your partner, it's associated with safety, even if it's unconscious. I don't think a lot of people think about that necessarily, like, well, of course I know I'm safe, but emotionally safe to know, not just free of judgment, but to know this person's got my back. That's why when you don't feel emotionally connected, it feels really high stakes, right? Like you could just be trying to get your point across and you might find yourself getting activated because they're just not listening at all. And there's no safety threat at all if somebody doesn't hear what you have to say. But when people get really hooked into wanting to be heard or validated, that's what that is, right? It's the sense that you matter. It's the sense that they're tuned into you. And if you feel in any way abandoned, even emotionally, that can activate a very real biological fight or flight response. Per attachment theory, you have to, even in adult relationships across your whole lifespan until the day you die, we really do need secure attachment. Complete independence without needing anybody is actually not healthy, and it's not the goal of a healthy relationship. What's healthy is the ability to need each other, to trust the other person, and the ability to come back into connection even when connection has been lost. So it's really the ability to stay connected while also knowing that no relationship is going to stay perfectly connected all the time. It's really about how do you navigate when you fall out of harmony and how do you come back in and repair. So based on what I just shared about what emotional connection is and how, the meaning that our brains give emotional disconnection, let's talk about how emotional disconnection impacts relationship. Frequent arguments. Okay, this is the top thing. Disconnection breeds a me versus you mentality instead of a unified us. You don't perceive that you are aligned. You don't perceive that that person's with you. And it is possible to feel like somebody's with you even if you disagree. You also notice that your arguments become more about tone and defensiveness than the actual issue. Sometimes you're just reacting from the lens, like if you're disconnected, you already perceive them as they're on the opposite side. So anything that they say, you're going to hear through that lens. And so if you're not emotionally connected and you bring something up, you're probably going to bring it up in a harsh startup, right? You're not going to bring it up in the right energy. Or if your partner is trying to tell you something and give you feedback and you don't feel connected to them or you don't feel safe with them, your reaction is probably going to be a lot more defensive than thank you for telling me that. So that's the first thing. Then, of course, we have poor communication. And I mentioned that earlier, that even the best communication tools like I statements or the feedback wheel, they're going to fall short when there's no emotional connection because of the activated fight or flight response, because of the perception that they're your enemy, because of the way your filter is then distorting what they say and attributing ill intentions to them. If you don't think that they have a positive intention, you're not going to hear the communication in the way that it was really intended, and vice versa. The third thing is that there's a loss of intimacy and passion. So this comes up a lot in marriages that have, where you've been together for a really long time. If you don't feel emotionally connected, if you don't feel like your partner really cares about your day, you're going to be less likely to want to be affectionate with them or have physical intimacy. This is huge, right? Passion and desire and intimacy fade because the vulnerability that's needed for closeness just feels too risky. Couples are going to shift into roommate mode and they're going to lose the spark that once kept them really close, right? To feel like, okay, maybe we had an argument, but I know that we can come back together. Once there's been a long period of time where that disconnection has been in place, and the longer that it goes, the harder it is to come back into connection. And then you also will see you have unsolved problems that could be solved. And I know John Gottman talks about this, right? 70% of ongoing issues in a relationship are not solvable in the sense that you may never see eye to eye. Your partner thinks it's this way, you think it's this way, you think it's better this way, they think it's better another way, and you just have to agree to disagree eventually, right? But there are solvable problems that can be resolved if you are in emotional connection, right? Because it brings you closer. Like, for example, co-parenting, household chores, how do you plan a vacation, where are you going to go? Those things can turn into an unnecessary conflict. Even though they are solvable, you could actually map it out. You could find where you have a similar why. You can find areas of overlap and build out from there. But if you don't have emotional connection, you don't A, want to do it, and B, you don't really have the capacity to do it. Your filter won't allow you to, and you're not in a place of goodwill around those conversations. And then the final thing is emotional disconnection actually has health implications. Emotional disconnection increases stress and anxiety. It raises cortisol levels. It will impact your physical health if you feel like you just have to brave the world alone. Again, we are wired for connection as humans all the way through our lifespan. And so to feel like you have to go it alone, it really does have negative health impacts. And there's lots of studies on this. When you look this up about longevity, people that are in healthy, successful, deeply connected relationships are healthier and they live longer. You can have a lower immune system, you can have poor sleep, and you can have emotional exhaustion when you're always having that program of disconnection running in the background. So I'm going to share 6 things that you can do to rebuild emotional connection. Even if you feel like your partner's walls are up, this can work. And even if you've been struggling with similar things for a really long time and you've tried to use communication skills and that didn't work, this is where you should start. So the first thing you have to know is, you have to understand the root of disconnection. Disconnection stems from 3 key areas. One is resentment. So that's unresolved hurts or unmet needs that have built up over time. I talked about resentments, was it 2 weeks ago, I think? So I won't get into resentment too much here. But when you have an accumulated backlog of hurts or fear or lack of safety, you're in resentment and you don't feel like you can open up as a result of that. And speaking of fear, that's another one of the things that will cause a disconnection is if you have a fear of vulnerability or if you have past trauma that makes emotional closeness feel unsafe, that is going to get in the way of your connection. And then the third thing that causes disconnection is depression or apathy. So this is like emotional withdrawal that's due to personal struggles or prolonged disconnection in other parts of their life. Like if you have a partner that's really chronically unhappy at work, they feel ineffective, they don't feel valued, they feel constantly overlooked, and they're in rumination about that, they're in pain, right? And when you're in pain, if you think about physical pain, your awareness gets very small. All you can focus on is that stubbed toe, right? You can't have a conversation with somebody when you're in pain. When you are in depression or apathy, or when you feel like you're really struggling, maybe there's unresolved traumas, that's going to make it really hard to open up or to even be aware of what it is that you need, right? You're just shutting down. It shows up as resignation or simply not even having the energy to try. And that might not be personal at all, but really could be their stuff, and it's not anything that you've done, and it's not your limitation. If your spouse is walled off or checked out, you want to, though, start by reflecting, what could be behind their walls. Are there resentments? First, always ask that. Have they expressed resentments, and have they been repaired? And if they haven't been repaired, then that has to happen. Are they scared? Is there some kind of reassurance that they need? Is there some kind of agreement of like, hey, if you open up, I promise I won't judge, or some kind of rules of engagement conversation that can help? Are they going through something medically or psychologically that makes it not possible right now? And that would be good you want to rule all of that out. The second thing is you can practice nonverbal connection. Now, this is actually a lot easier than communication, which requires that, frontal lobe of our brain. Not all connection comes from words. In fact, 90% of communication is energy and body language, and it's nonverbal. So what you can do to create connection without words is to offer physical presence, calm physical presence, just availability. I am here, so that if they want to say something to you, something popped into their brain, they can just turn toward you, right? It also communicates that you're available in case they would want to turn toward you. You can hold their hand, you can offer them a warm hug, you can touch them, you can sit next to them, sit very close to them when you're watching a show. There's just things that you can do, even in the kitchen if they're doing dishes or something like that. Stand close to them when you're doing the things that you're working on. Come into the same room if you're both working on your computers. That goes a long way. Eye contact, also looking at your partner with intention and openness, curiosity, showing through your gaze that you are attuned, that you're looking for information, that you care, and paying attention to their emotional cues and responding with empathy, even if they don't say much, right? So if you notice that their energy has shifted, something happened, they're not feeling good, even before you say anything, you're looking at them with a certain look on your face that shows, I see you and I can tell something's off. That communicates connection and presence without you having to say a word. The other thing you want to do is you want to lead with empathy, because empathy is really the cornerstone of emotional connection. This is where in your relationship, if you want them to feel safe, they have to know that when they do open up about the meaning that they're giving something, even if you disagree, that you're not going to judge them, that you're not going to judge their emotions, that you're going to just try to understand, first seek to understand before you position your own opinions or your own feelings about that. I think it's tempting sometimes too to want to jump in when our partner shares their experience, especially if we think that we can fix it or give them a reframe. Well, you could look at it like this, and you quickly want to move off of what they are experiencing in the moment, and they're not asking for that. So when I talk about empathy, I'm talking about just listening and not having them immediately aware of your thoughts and feelings in response to what they've said, but you serve as more of a sounding board through curiosity and attentiveness to what their own feelings are about what's coming up for them. And then they can look inward with a safe sounding board, right? Like they're exploring. If you show curiosity, they can reflect in that safe container. I know it sounds really easy to say, and it's not that easy to do, but if you can keep your feelings out of it and really find out what theirs are, that will go a long way. And even if you don't know what to say, let's say they share something with you and you're not sure how to handle it, especially if you're somebody that's used to wanting to have solutions, all you have to do is acknowledge their feelings. Like, that sounds really hard. I'm here for you. Or even, I don't even know what to say, but I'm just so glad that you told me that. That in and of itself will go a long way. That shows empathy. You also want to embody the connection that you want to have. So true connection starts within. Now, it's hard if you are somebody who's always giving and you're not getting anything back. But if the way that you're giving has been a give to get, or it has been sort of protest behaviors around the disconnection, this will apply to you. You really, if you want more love and you want more presence and you want more understanding from your partner, you want to begin by embodying those qualities yourself and showing up as a match for that from the inside out. So what that means is you're not trying to get anything at first. You're exhibiting the qualities of the relationship that you want to create, whether it's patience or presence or empathy or hope or trust or assuming the best, right? Having the assumption that their intentions are good. That energy is really contagious, and it can inspire them to reciprocate. Two more things. You want to be consistent and patient with this, okay? Rebuilding connection is not a linear process, especially if you've had past hurts and resentments and things are complicated. Your efforts may not yield results right away, especially if these patterns have been entrenched for a really long time. But if you think of your actions as planting seeds and over time your consistency, you just water those seeds with your energy, your attention. You just imagine that everything you do is to water those seeds that you're planting and show up with empathy and consistency. That will create safety for them to lower their walls over time. I work with couples all the time where it is frustrating for weeks at a time for people where they're like, I'm showing up in all these new ways and they're still treating me like that's not how I am, because their filter hasn't updated, their psyche hasn't updated to the changes that you're making. So just trust me when I say over time consistency will pay off, and you really want to let go of timelines and expectations. It's not up to you the how or the when of the other person. The only thing that you can control is how you show up in alignment with what it is that you're trying to create in the dynamic between you. So focus on your inputs and not the immediate outcomes. And then the final thing is to stay in your lane. Okay, so this is for those of you where you're like, I'm ready to connect, but my partner just will, I'm right up here up to the line and they won't meet me here. If your partner needs space, you really want to resist the urge to push for connection. Connection cannot be forced. If we have attachment wounding in earlier parts of our life, our own needs for connection will drive us to want to tear the walls down and try to rip down the defenses to try to get closer to that person. But when we rip down defenses or try to pull them down, they only go up stronger. So you almost have to support the defenses so that they can come down. Like I think about yoga. If I push my stretch too hard, my body will contract and it will hurt and I won't be able to go deep in. But if I go really slow and I give myself time to adjust and breathe into it, then I can go a little more because my defenses aren't getting activated by pushing too fast. So hopefully that's a helpful analogy. I think it is really difficult if you're with somebody who has more of an avoidant attachment style. That takes a lot of patience because you're like, well, I'm waiting and it could be years. Well, then we have a different issue. But as long as you know that there's nothing on your side of the street that will be blocking the connection, that's the most important thing. All right. So the bottom line for today is that if you're struggling with communication, or if you feel like you just can't get on the same team, or your spouse is really hearing something different than what you're trying to say, it's not landing because it's getting distorted, then you really got to focus on emotional connection before communication. And if you can really do that first, I think you'll find more goodwill, more generosity. And then when you do have to have harder conversations and you do have to use that conscious part of your mind to communicate and using all the tools and skills that you might be learning or working on right now, that is going to support you. When I work with my clients, that's the first thing I tell them is please set aside your hot button issues, not to put them under the rug, just temporarily, but we have to build that connection before we can even start on all of the communicating that you want to do. And if you like my content or the topics that I cover, please subscribe to my channel. That way it's going to reach more people who need to hear this stuff and you won't miss any of my weekly videos.